Natalie Sideserf here of Sideserf Cake Studio, and I'm going to show you how I made a beholder cake from Dungeons & Dragons. This cake is made for my patron Liz Sanchez, who is dedicating it to her husband Juan and her son Hoven. The two of them play Dungeons & Dragons all the time, so this beholder cake is perfect for them. And shout out to Attacha, Rudolph, and Satterfield. Thanks for joining Patreon. October is almost here, so I made a playlist of some of my creepiest cakes. So go check that out. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now because I post a new cake video every week. So let's get started. I'm starting out stacking round cake layers onto a custom-made cake board. I have to use a cake board with a rounded bottom because if I just stack cake layers and I tried to carve the cake into a sphere, the bottom would pretty much just collapse because gravity. I'm carving the cake with a serrated knife. So if I were making a cake of a basketball or a bowling ball, I would try my best to make sure that the cake is carved as perfectly round as I could possibly get it. But this cake is a round mythical creature, so it doesn't have to be perfect and clean because it's more organic. So there's some wiggle room, which I like. Once the cake is roundish, I spread a thin layer of buttercream over the entire cake. This buttercream seals in the cake's moisture and it also gives me a smooth surface to work on. Now I'm carving out a small chunk of cake for the mouth. So I don't want to carve too deep or the cake could potentially collapse, so I have to keep it somewhat shallow. The final layer that I will use to sculpt all the texture and the details is rolled out of modeling chocolate that I colored gray. So I draped it over the cake and then I gather the excess chocolate and I trim it away with scissors and then I blend the seams with a sculpting tool. Now onto the mouth. So you can see that the chocolate has torn a bit and some of the green buttercream is like spewing out. So that's totally fine. Sometimes that happens, but I'll just fix it later. Here I'm starting to shape the mouth. And I realize that I want it wider. So what do? I bust out my knife and I trim more cake away. So this kind of stuff happens sometimes. As the cake starts to like come together, you're visualizing it and you realize you want to make some adjustments, so you just cut it away. At least that's what I do. In my experience, you can't really do this if you cover your cake in fondant. And that's just because fondant doesn't blend as easily as modeling chocolate. I mean, ideally, I would have just gotten the mouth right from the start, but what are you gonna do? It's handmade and that stuff just is bound to happen. It's time to sculpt the details. So I'm starting by sculpting the back of the beholder's throat and its hangy ball. So I'm adding small chunks of ivory modeling chocolate and I'm sculpting those details. I'm working my way from the inside of the mouth to the outside. Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. So D&D is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game. So it's a tabletop RPG where the players describe their character's actions through talking. A beholder is one of the creatures in the game. It has been in every edition of the game since it came out back in 1975. Talk about a classic character. And now I'm making it a classic cake character. The beholder is also a completely original character of D&D. So it's not based off of mythology or any other stories like some of the other creatures of the game. I have never played Dungeons & Dragons, but after doing a little research, I found out that the beholder seems to be kind of a pain in the butt. So it's described as aggressive and hateful and greedy, and it looks down on all the other creatures, so it pretty much just messes with them, and it either imprisons them or destroys them. I mean, I think it looks cool though, and it's super fun to sculpt, so it's kind of a jerk, but I like him. Now that the mouth is sculpted, I'm working on the eyes, starting with the large chocolate eye that is just above the mouth. It also has eye stalks that branch out from the top of its head, kind of like tentacles, which I'll add a little later. When a beholder attacks, it uses the center eye to block the magic from whatever it's fighting, and then it uses the other smaller eyes to attack it with magic. It seems to have both offense and defense covered. I'm adding gray chocolate to the sides of the mouth with some vertical folds in it to create like this stretch effect. I want the mouth to look as if it's wide open and the skin is super taut. I'm keeping the lips somewhat simple with some soft creases. It looks like I'm smacking its lips with the sculpting tool. You can see I'm sculpting even more creases on the cheeks that radiate out from the mouth. So the repetition of these lines emphasize the mouth, making it feel even larger and even wider. Beholders are known for their giant mouths, so I want it to be the focal point. And now it's time to add those eye stalks I talked about earlier. So the modeling chocolate won't hold upright on its own, so I thread a thin food-safe wire through a modeling chocolate coil, and then I place it into the cake. Then I just blend the base of the eyes into the cake to make it look seamless. If this cake were made for a customer, I would just let them know that they want to take all of those eye stalks out first before cutting and eating the cake. It's like when you take the flowers off of a wedding cake before you eat it. And now on to my husband's favorite part. Let's paint. I'm using quite a few colors on this one. I have black, there's white, red, brown, yellow, and some green. And I'm painting the mouth first. I'm sticking to pinks and reds and some browns, and I'm adding deeper, darker areas in the creases and then lighter highlights on the areas that are raised. As you can see, this beholder is toothless at the moment, and that's intentional. So I've learned from experience to add more fragile elements of the cake, things like teeth, after I paint. Painting this mouth without those teeth makes it a breeze, but if they were in, then I would have to avoid getting color on them or accidentally knocking them out while I'm painting, and it's just so much easier if you add them later. I like the way the mouth looks, so finally, let's give him those super sharp, pointy teeth. I love this part. I sculpted little sockets in the gums for each tooth, which makes placing the teeth in easy peasy. The teeth are made of very small ivory modeling chocolate cones. So I just roll them in between my fingers. I purposely made the teeth different sizes, and that just adds a little fun. I think it gives the mouth an even more grotesque feel. Grotesque in a good way. Modeling chocolate sticks to modeling chocolate pretty well, but once in a while, a tooth would feel just a little bit loose. So all I have to do is brush a little water into that gum socket, then I place the tooth in and it stays great. For the eye, I decided to have it looking off to the side and down slightly. That's one of those decisions that you can make that gives the sculpture more of a natural feel. So if it was looking straight forward, it would feel more mechanic, but since it's off to the side, it kind of creates movement and a little bit of action. Like, what's he looking at? Creeping me out. It's looking at me, isn't it? I have got to add some thin veins to this eye. Got to. I want the eye to look open wide and kind of like stressed. And I feel like those veins are gonna help. So I just paint in with a very, very thin brush and I just wiggle my hand a little bit. Easy veins. I'm cleaning up the eye with some gold. I want the outside of the eye to be a bit darker and then it starts to get lighter towards the center. I'm even adding a little bit of a shimmery gold food color in there. Some fun. The pupil's painted with black and it's in a similar shape to the actual eye. So it's kind of that cat eye look. think these teeth need a little love. They look a little flat, so I'm adding a few highlights with some white and then some brown smudges. Now that my teeth are finished, I can add the large tongue that folds over the teeth. I just place it directly onto the other mini tongue that I sculpted in there, and then I blend it in with a tool. To add some texture, I'm pressing down on the tongue with a hard bristled brush. Now I'm painting it deep red. I want to use a much different color than the rest of the mouth so that the tongue kind of stands out more, so it pops. To paint the skin of the beholder, I'm going to layer quite a few colors. So I'm starting out with a thin layer of a deep brownish red to cover the whole thing. I do want some of that gray to show through, so this color is super thin and translucent. It's similar to watercolor paint, only it's food color. I'm painting halfway up the eye stalks so that the body is more of a deep red and then it has a gradient to a gray. Looks like I've got plenty of red, so now I'm going in and adding some black splotches in some areas. I don't have an exact idea of where the color will go as I work on it. I just kind of mess around with it until I like the way it looks. I rely less on a plan and more my intuition. The last thing that I want to add to this cake is some shine. So I'm carefully painting piping gel onto the eye. I have to be careful because if I brush too long, the colors will start to kind of smear and mix, and that is no good. I also added some shine to the tongue, the gums, and the teeth. I love the look of the matte skin against those glossy areas. And there you have it, a beholder cake from Dungeons & Dragons. Honestly, this cake was a blast to make. There's so many fun elements. There's creases and folds and veins and everything that I love to sculpt. Now let's cut the cake. Very excited. If you like this cake, don't forget to share this video. Let the world know that you're a D&D fan or a cake fan, either way.